Hi, and thanks for watching this message video, and don't forget to go through the life lesson that goes with it. And for those who can't make a Sunday, don't forget that there's a podcast of that sermon that goes along with this message video and life lesson. Today we are continuing on in our series called Do You Know God?, where we're looking at all the different biblical names that have been used for God and then connecting them to Jesus. Last week, we touched on the name El Shaddai, which means God Almighty, and it's the name that God used when saying to Abraham, I am going to bless you and your wife Sarah with a son, Isaac, even though you're old. And they were old. He was 100, Sarah was 90 years old, and they had to wait 25 years for this fulfillment of this promise, which during this time, both of them had a lot of faith tests that they failed. One of those faith tests that they failed was with a young woman named Hagar, who was a slave to Sarah, and so she was voluntold that she was going to be a surrogate mother by sleeping with Abraham. Now, this leads us to how Hagar ended up becoming a slave of Sarah in the first place, which actually is because of a different faith test failure on Abraham's part. Genesis 12:10 through 20. At that time, a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt, where he lived as a foreigner. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarai, Look, you are a very beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, This is his wife. Let's kill him. Then we can have her. So please tell them you are my sister. Then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you. And sure enough, when Abram arrived in Egypt, everyone noticed Sarai's beauty. When the palace officials saw her, they sang her praises to Pharaoh, their king, and Sarai was taken into his palace. Then Pharaoh gave Abram many gifts because of her: sheep, goats, cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord sent terrible plagues upon Pharaoh and his household because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh summoned Abram and accused him sharply. What have you done to me? He demanded. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister and allow me to take her as my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and get out of here. Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them, and he sent Abram out of the country, along with his wife and all his possessions. Even though God promised Abram that he was going to bless him, that this land that he was in was going to be a land that was filled with fruitfulness, as soon as the famine struck, Abraham left and went to Egypt because he obviously didn't believe God, and now was going to a land where he thought there was going to be far more blessing than what God could provide. This was a faith test failure on Abram's part. And not only that, Moses doesn't hide the fact that he seems to be all about himself, even to the exclusion of his wife, Sarai. And so it has to appear to Sarai as if Abraham really doesn't fear God the way that he should, and that he's making a bunch of mistakes along the way. And even Pharaoh seems to fear God more than what Abram does at this point in time. And so if you're Hagar, you now find yourself as a female servant to this very confused couple who have now been banished out of Egypt and are in the exact same spot they were when they fled to go to the land of Egypt. And so, again, if you're Hagar, she had to have felt like a pawn in somebody else's game, and it had to have been very confusing to her. And ultimately, she had no idea that things, as I alluded to earlier, were about to get a whole lot worse. In fact, here's how Moses describes what happened. Genesis 16:1 through 6. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. This happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress Sarai with contempt. Then Sarai said to Abram, This is all your fault. I put my servant into your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me. Abram replied, Look, she's your servant, so deal with her as you see fit. Then Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. At one point, Abram and Sarah really did think that it was a perfect plan to use Hagar as a surrogate mother to fulfill their own ideas, their own plans to be parents, even though they were promised by God that he was working on it. This was a huge faith test failure on their part. And what's more, Moses does not hide the fact that both Abram and Sarai had little to no remorse for the anguish they were causing Hagar by forcing her to be a part of this whole experience, which is a sad truth when you think about it, that all of us can relate to, and that when we're hurting, it's easy to hurt others without even noticing it or caring about it. And at this time in the story, Abram, Sarai, and Hagar, they're all hurting. But while a lot of people know how the story ends for Abram or Abraham and Sarah, and that they did get the promise delivered, a lot of people don't know how the story goes on or how it ends for Hagar. Well, here's how Moses describes what happens next. Genesis 16, 7 through 13. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness along the road to Shur. The angel said to her, Hagar, Sarai's servant, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she replied. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her authority. Then he added, I will give you more descendants than you can count. And the angel also said, you are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, which means God hears. For the Lord has heard your cry of distress. This son of yours will be a wild man, as untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all his relatives. Thereafter, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord, who had spoken to her. She said, you are the God who sees me. She also said, have I truly seen the one who sees me? El-Roi, the God who sees me. When you think about it, Hagar had to have felt unseen to God. Most of her life, she's been in slavery. She's been in positions where she's been used for the benefit of others. And if anybody has ever grown up in an environment where they've been used for the benefit of others, or they've grown up in poverty, which is like a form of slavery, they might feel the same way that Hagar has felt, and that just God doesn't even notice them, that God doesn't even see them. But that's not true. Jesus is El-Roi, and he does see us. He knows everything that we're going through. He knows everything that we're dealing with. And when you and I grasp that he sees us, that he knows us, and he understands the things that we've had to endure, and that he still has a plan for us if we're willing to follow him and be obedient to his commands, like what he was asking Hagar, this changes everything. Everything. In fact, one of the coolest stories about El-Roi, God seeing us, is in the New Testament when Jesus, our El-Roi, asked Philip to be one of his disciples. And Philip was like, oh, yeah, man. But he wanted to go and tell his buddy Nathaniel that he had found the Messiah. He had found the Son of God, and that he had asked him to be a disciple, and that Nathaniel might want to be one too. And so he went and asked his buddy Nathaniel, who was kind of a loner. And this is what we're told happened. John 1, 43 through 49. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, come follow me. Philip was from Bethsaida, Andrew and Peter's hometown. Philip went to look for Nathanael and told him, we have found the very person Moses and the prophets wrote about. His name is Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth. Nazareth? Exclaimed Nathanael. Can anything good come from Nazareth? Come and see for yourself, Philip replied. As they approached, Jesus said, now here is a genuine son of Israel, a man of complete integrity. How do you know about me? Nathanael asked. Jesus replied, I could see you under the fig tree before Philip found you. Then Nathanael exclaimed, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. When we feel alone or unseen to God, or when we have been used by others for their benefit, it is easy to become angry or contemptuous or rebellious against God or against others, or both. But when we recognize, like what Hagar did, or like what Nathanael did, that God does see us, that he understands what it is that we've been going through or what it is that we've had to endure, and that he also has a plan for us for the future that he is inviting us into, then everything can change. In fact, my prayer is that every single person who was listening to this would recognize the same thing that Nathanael did, is that you are seen by God, and that when you recognize that you would do the same thing that he did, and that you would immediately worship Jesus as Lord and trust that He does have a plan for you, for us, for His church, and that we can trust it because He sees what we're going through, what we're dealing with, and definitely knows how to lead us into a much better future.